Good evening. Welcome tonight to Preserving Cherries at Home, Dehydration, Pickling, and Canning. Today's Master Food Preservers, I'm Robin Barker, your MC. Our Q&A moderator is Elena Alvarez. We have panelists, Ellen Goodwin, Elena Alvarez again, Rachel Jones, and me, Robin Barker, who will bring up the end. This program is being recorded and will be posted on our website. And a link to a handout with recipes for this class will be provided when attendees submit the post-class Zoom survey. Little Zoom housekeeping, please keep your mics muted when not speaking. During live questions, unmute and speak or raise your Zoom hand, and we will have live questions after the second presentation and after the fourth presentation. To raise your hand, you'll need to push the react button and a little menu will pop up and raise hand is one of the options. At any time, you can type questions or comments in the Zoom Q&A feature. Look for this icon in the menu bar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you don't see Q&A, click the three dots for more, and it'll show up a menu, and at the top of that menu, choose Q&A. Who are we? The UC MFP Online Delivery Program is a community outreach, online-based, grant-funded, volunteer program within the University of California Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources. We provide up-to-date research-based information on food safety and preservation. Our mission is to keep Californians safe and well as they use culturally appropriate, research-based practices to safely preserve food in the home, reducing food waste, increasing food security, and providing engaging ways for Californians to eat healthy food. We won't read you all of this fine print, but this is just to emphasize that we are all volunteers. We don't speak for the University of California, and we do not endorse or oppose any specific organization, service, or product. So, for example, if we show you a specific piece of equipment, we are not endorsing that specific product or brand. Today's program, we have dehydrated cherries with Ellen Goodwin to start. Then we have cherry pie filling with Elena Alvarez, cherry syrup with Rachel Jones, and finally pickled cherries with me. Before you begin, we always want to emphasize that you clean, because microorganisms can cause accelerated food spoilage and illness like salmonella and listeria. So clean your work area and any surfaces you may touch, including, for example, your phone. You want to tie back your hair, wear an apron, and wash your hands. Gather your utensils, recipe, and ingredients, and wash your produce. So we're going to first start with Ellen Goodwin with dehydrated cherries. Ellen?
Okay, thank you, Robin. So there are two main kinds of cherries, sweet and sour. Sour are also sometimes called tart or pie cherries. The vast majority of the cherries that are grown in California are sweet cherries. It's actually difficult to find fresh sour cherries in a farmer's market or a store in California. So some of the common types of sweet cherries are Bing. There's like the red ones you see in the photo there. Coral, Ceylon, Lapin, or Rainier. Rainier it's another common type. It's yellow with kind of a red blush on it. Some common types of sour cherries are Morello, Montmorency, and Early Richmond. Sour cherries are usually, in California, available either frozen or canned. Next slide. Cherries, of course, are grown all over the world, and the US is a major producer. They were brought to the US by English colonists in the early 17th century. They've been well established in California since the 19th century. And California is the second largest producer of sweet cherries in the United States. We are exceeded only by Washington State. Next slide. So when you get your cherries home and you want to make something with them, of course, the first challenge is pitting them, and it can be a little tedious if you're going to do it with a knife. So there are a lot of devices out there. You can see the one in the photo here that I used, and it does 6 cherries at a time, and it drops the pits into a little cup. I would advise that you just kind of quickly check the cherries. Once in a while, one of the pits kind of hangs on after you've pitted them. There are also cherry pitters that do 1 cherry at a time. I've heard of people using chopsticks or even using the end of a paper clip to dig out the cherry. And actually, as an experiment, I tried both a chopstick and a paper clip, and I did not have much luck, but my device worked great. So, next slide. So, assuming if you are starting with fresh cherries, by the way, you can dehydrate fresh or frozen cherries. I did some of both for this presentation, just to see how it would go. They both worked great. But with fresh cherries, you would wash, stem, pit, and then place them. If you're cutting them, cut side up on mesh dehydrator trays, leaving plenty of space for airflow around the fruit. Pitted cherries can also be dehydrated whole. It just takes longer to do it. And of course, you can also do frozen cherries. I have a picture here showing that I defrosted the frozen cherries in my refrigerator overnight. That's always the safest way to defrost something. Put it in the refrigerator for a few hours or overnight. So then I dehydrated the cherries at 140 degrees Fahrenheit, and it takes anywhere from roughly 18 to 30 hours. That's kind of a long span, but the reason is that cherries vary a lot. You know, you can have really big, juicy ones, or you can have much smaller cherries. And so I would suggest you begin checking them in the dehydrator after maybe 16 to 18 hours. If you have, I have, you can see the picture here. That is my dehydrator, and it happens to have a fan, and the heat source comes from the back. So all of the cherries dehydrate kind of at the same rate. If you happen to have a dehydrator that has a fan or the heat source on the bottom, you might want to rotate your trays every several hours. That will make your cherries come out, be done basically at the same time. Next slide. So how do you know when they're done? Well, a cherry, when it's dehydrated correctly, it's kind of like a raisin, you know? I mean, it's not rock hard because you don't want something rock hard like, putting it on your oatmeal or something. So, what I would suggest is after 16 to 18 hours, take a few out, let them cool, and then just press them together. And if the 2 sides of the cherry don't stick, then it's probably dehydrated. So they should be pliable but not sticky. And the good news is if you over dehydrate them and they do turn into little rocks, you just have to soak them in water. That actually happened to me. I made some carrot cake with some dried cherries, and I had done one batch a little too long. I just soaked them in water, and they were great in the cake. Okay. So once you've pulled your cherries out, once they are completely cooled, they need to be cool, put them into glass jars, put on lids, and then shake the jars daily for 7 to 10 days. And what this does is it equalizes the moisture. This step is called conditioning. And if any moisture appears inside the jar, just put the cherries back in the dehydrator for a few hours and go through the cooling process again. They'll be fine. Okay, next slide. Okay, so how to store dehydrated cherries. I used a vacuum sealer. This is totally optional. It just takes a little more air out and I think probably extends the shelf life. And the shelf life, even without doing that, should be about 6 to 12 months, so long as you keep the cherries in preferably sort of a cool, dark, maybe a cabinet or maybe you have a pantry. And one other thing I'll point out is that when you can see some examples here. When you have canned, say, fruit or jam, and once the process is finished and it's cooled and it's sealed, you don't have to leave the ring on. When you are storing dehydrated foods, you do need to leave the ring on because it helps to keep the lid securely on the jar. Otherwise, it can come loose, air can get in, and your fruit will just not last as long. And of course, freezing is another great way to store dehydrated cherries. Honestly, dehydrated cherries in the freezer are probably going to last more than a year easily if you want to keep them for that long. I would guess you'd use them before that. Next slide, please. So, what do you do with dehydrated cherries? Well, you can really do anything that you would use raisins for. Like I said, I used them in carrot cake. They're great in muffins, cookies. Here, I made a salad and threw some on top. They're nice in trail mix. You can put them on in granola, muesli, on top of oatmeal, or just for snacking. And if you would like to have more information about dehydrating, the Master Food Preserver Program actually did a much longer and more detailed presentation on dehydrating food with or without a dehydrator. And the link is here, and I believe the link is also in the chat. So that could give you a lot more detail. So, okay, back to you, Robin.
Thank you very much, Ellen. And the next we have is Elena with cherry pie filling.
Thanks, Robin. Can you go ahead and advance the slide, please? So for cherry pie filling, we're going to be using the National Center for Home Food Preservation recipe today. This recipe does call for sour cherries, and like Robin or Ellen mentioned, sorry about that. They are hard to find fresh, but you can absolutely use frozen cherries in this recipe. That's what I did. Um, so you're going to need either fresh or thawed sour cherries, granulated sugar, clear gel, which I'll talk more about on the next slide because that's an unusual ingredient, some cold water, bottled lemon juice. The bottled part is important for safety, so unfortunately we can't use fresh in this recipe. And then optionally, you can add some spices and seasonings. So you can add a little bit of cinnamon, almond extract, and red food dye if you like to do that. I am not adding those to my recipe today, but like I said, those are available if you want to add them. Next, please. So what is clear gel and why do I need to use it? And do I need to use it? So clear gel is a brand of modified cornstarch. So it comes in a cook type and an instant type. It's really important to note that only the cook type clear gel is appropriate for use in home canned pie filling recipes. This is because the instant type starts thickening immediately, and that's going to affect the heat penetration through the jar when it's being processed. So we don't want that. We want to make sure that we have nice, safe, predictable heat penetration through that jar so that we can kill off any bacteria that are in there trying to spoil our pie filling. So the thickening properties are different from a standard starch like a cornstarch or a tapioca starch or flour. Those are all things that you would typically use in like a fresh made pie filling recipe. I know that typically I like to use flour in mine. But we can't do this with canned pie filling. If you are choosing to freeze this, or if you just want to pop it in the fridge to use within a few days, or you're making a pie right now, you can totally do that. If you are going to process it and store it on your shelf out of the refrigerator or the freezer, then you cannot use any of those thickeners. You can, if you do not have access to clear gel or a accepted equivalent, you can just omit it entirely. That is perfectly safe to do. You do not have to add it. You just can't replace it with anything else. So when we do this, what you do is we're going to thicken it when we open the jar to use it. So usually this means opening up your jar, dumping it into your pie shell or your pan or whatever you would like to bake it in. Um, and then stirring in a little bit of cornstarch or flour or tapioca starch, depending on what your preferences are. So there are a couple of other brands of modified starch that have been accepted by various university extension offices as being an equivalent to clear gel, and those are ThermFlow and Thick Gel. So those are options if you can get a hold of those more easily. It is a little bit difficult to find these in the grocery store because they're kind of a specialty item. Next slide, please. So moving on. Um, first, the first step of this is of this pie filling is basically making a syrup. So we're going to combine the water, sugar, clear gel if you're using it, and any of the cinnamon, almond extract, or food dye that you're choosing to use. So in a pot, you're going to heat it over medium-high heat until it begins to thicken up and bubble a little bit. You want it to be somewhat thickened. It's not going to be as thick as it will be when you take it out of the oven in a completed pie. But it will thicken up while we're cooking it because it's a cook type clear gel. Once it's thickened and a little bit bubbly, you can go ahead and add the lemon juice and you're going to boil it for 1 minute after that. Next, please. So after that, you're going to dump in the cherries. You want to do this immediately once that 1 minute is up. So make sure you have them pre-measured out and ready to go. If you are using fresh cherries, before you start making your syrup, you do need to blanch the cherries. I did not cover that because I am using frozen cherries here, and you do not need to blanch the frozen cherries. But if you are choosing to use fresh cherries, you will need to blanch them per the recipe, and that will be in the handout. So like I said, after that 1 minute boil, you're going to fold in the cherries immediately and then fill the mixture into your jars. This is done the same way we do anything. This recipe uses a 1 inch headspace. And you want to make sure that you get your rims nice and clean and wiped off because this is sticky. And that can definitely interfere with your lid sealing. So next slide, please. So I like to use an atmospheric steam canner for my high acid recipes. This is equivalent to a boiling water canner. It is not a substitute for pressure canning. So we are going to have our canner heated up. When you're ready to put your jars in, you want it to be 180 Fahrenheit for this recipe because this is a hot pack recipe. So you're going to put the jars on the rack inside the canner, and you're going to turn your heat all the way up on your stove because you want that to boil and start steaming to fill up your dome. So once that's done, you're going to go ahead, watch for the steam to start coming out the vent hole, and use a thermometer to check the temperature inside the camera through the hole. Inside the canner, not the camera, my goodness. Through the hole. So you're not lifting up the lid to check the temperature because you're going to let all the steam out, right? So usually a digital instant read meat thermometer, candy thermometer, kitchen thermometer fits really nicely through the holes on these canners. You just slide it in there, check the temperature. You want it to be right around 212, which is the same temperature as boiling. Once it's up to temp, you want to let the steam continue to come out for 1 minute. This makes sure that the entire dome is full of steam and you don't have any spots that are still dry air. So you're going to go ahead, start your timer for the processing time specified in the recipe. So you can adjust the heat if you need to during this time to maintain a steady boil and steam column. So you don't want the lid like rocking around a lot to release the steam. You just want a nice constant steam column. So this is kind of the equivalent of what we call a smooth jazz boil in water bath canning. You don't want this rocking around and making a bunch of noise. You just want nice, steady steam. Once your processing time is done, you want to turn off the heat and you want to wait 5 minutes with the lid on. So this lets the jars cool down a little more slowly. It helps reduce siphoning and it lets the lid seal a little bit better because of that. Then, once that time is up, go ahead, take off the lid, remove the jars. I like to put mine on a towel lined tray just so I can move them around a little bit easier because I have a tiny kitchen. Um, After they have cooled without you touching them for 12 to 24 hours, then you can check the seals and refrigerate or reprocess if you want to any jars that haven't sealed. Then you can wipe down, label, and store. Um, Next slide, please. So, a few suggestions for using your pie filling. Of course, you can use it in a pie or hand pies. My family also likes using it as an ice cream topping. Or if you want to have a little bit more of a fun breakfast, you can do it in yogurt or oatmeal or top pancakes and waffles with it. Um, it also works great in like a fruit crumble or a cobbler. I saw a really fun suggestion to swirl it into brownie batter to have little pops of fruit throughout. I thought that sounded really good, and I'm gonna have to try it. Um, and then you can go ahead and top a cheesecake with it. So I think that's it for cherry pie filling. So we have a little bit of time for questions. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A box. Ellen, you got one about dehydrated cherries. So for the dehydrated cherries, when you fill up the jars for conditioning shaking, is it recommended to fill the jar about halfway full?
Yeah, halfway, or basically you just need to be able to freely shake them in the jar. So halfway or two-thirds, something like that. That should give you enough room to shake the cherries.
And then to answer Tracy's question, which is, can I use sweet cherries and just decrease the sugar in the pie filling recipe? Yes, that should be safe. You're going to have to experiment a little bit with the amount of sugar to add, but you're fine safety-wise. As a reminder to everyone, you can also speak up, unmute your mics, raise your hand if you want to ask your question out loud, or of course, you're more than welcome to type it into the Q&A box if you prefer. So Dawn asked, for the cherry pie filling, can you share an example of how you would thicken it after opening up the jar? Would you still use the same type of thickener? Personally, I just dump it into the pie shell and mix in whatever thickener I would usually use, usually either cornstarch or flour in my house. Um, but whatever you would normally use should work totally fine. You do want to make sure that you're baking the pie long enough that it will actually thicken up. Usually I find that around the 45 minute to 1 hour mark is about right in my oven, but my oven runs a little bit cooler, so you might have to experiment.
I think it also really helps to wait a bit. Once your pie comes out of the oven, you need to kind of let it settle down and it'll thicken up much more. It does smell so wonderful and it's so nice and warm to have it melting with the ice cream, but you're going to get a runnier pie unless you let it cool down for, 15 minutes, half hour. That's been my experience at least.
Yeah, we usually let ours cool for a solid hour or two. We like a slightly firmer pie filling. I have a couple other questions here. Why do you have to use bottled lemon juice and not fresh? Um, so in canning, the especially with high acid canning, a lot of the concerns are to make sure that your product is acidic enough to be safely high acid canned. So natural whole lemons, fall delicious, have varying levels of acidity, and we can't really guarantee that we're getting enough acid into our recipe to make sure that it's safe if we're using fresh lemon juice. Bottled lemon juice has a guaranteed acidity level from the manufacturer. So you do want to make sure that you're using bottled unless a recipe specifically says that you can use fresh. And then I also have a question from Sandy. Where would you buy a steam canner?
I bought mine through Amazon. You know, yeah,
Yep,
it was on
same.
sale.
Yeah.
And so, you know, are there specific, there are specific makes that you can look for that,
The main thing that you want to look for is you want to get a dome style one. Um, the kind of like pot style ones where it claims to double as a water bath canner haven't been adequately tested. So we really only recommend using the dome style um, atmospheric steam canners, but really that's the only thing you have to look out for. Okay, do we have anybody that wants to ask a question aloud?
if not, we can take questions at the end and we
Yes.
can move on to Rachel. And so,
Oh,
oh,
Morel
wait a minute.
has
Okay.
a question. Go ahead and unmute.
Hello. I this is all pretty I'm still learning and this is all pretty new to me, but in regards to the recipe, is this a recipe that we're able to, in the case like say we don't end up canning it, that we can use pretty quickly to
Yeah,
pie filling? Okay.
you can just go ahead and pour it right into a pie shell and bake it up.
Okay.
Or you can also store it in the fridge or freeze it. Um, you absolutely do not have to can it.
Thank you so much.
If you do freeze it and you put it in a jar, make sure you use a jar that is a wide mouth canning jar and not a narrow one. And because when the pie filling freezes, it's going to expand. And if you have a narrow mouth jar, it can break around the shoulder area. And so, in the wide mouth, you'll also want to leave about an inch. And sometimes some of the canning jars have a line that's specifically a freezer line to make sure that there's enough room. Now, of course, you can also can in, a gallon or freezer bag, and there are other options. But if you do use a canning jar, you want to make sure you use a wide mouth canning jar.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so we'll move on to Rachel, and Rachel is going to do a live demonstration. So I'm going to stop the share, and I'm going to spotlight Rachel for everyone. So,
Hey, thanks, Robin. So I will be talking through how to make cherry syrup and doing a little demo of a few ways that you can use it. So cherry syrup is a super simple recipe with a really versatile result. So it's great if you end up with a surplus of cherries, maybe you know someone with a tree who's trying to get rid of a bunch, or you just want a quick, flavorful sweetener on hand. So I'm using the National Center for Home Food Preservation's berry syrup recipe. You can also use this recipe for blueberries, grapes, raspberries, and strawberries. yeah, you can only swap it with that list of fruits. Those are the only fruits that have been tested for this process. So yeah, any of those, you're good to use this same method. And this recipe works great for refrigeration, for freezing, or for shelf storage. For storing on the shelf, though, you need to process your syrup either in a steam canner, like what Elena showed, or in a boiling water canner. If you don't process it by one of those methods, then your syrup is not safe to store on the shelf. It hasn't gone through enough of the killing of the microbes and botulism, yeah, that's possibly in there. So yeah, unless you're doing that process, you'll need to put it into the freezer. And also freezing it allows you to retain more of that bright cherry flavor. So yeah, that's another reason why you'd choose one over the other. It's really up to your preference. Maybe you'd rather not take up freezer space or have to go through the thawing process. But again, if you are planning to store it on the shelf, you will have to do one of those processing methods. So for how to make the syrup, so if you will first select about 8 cups of fresh or frozen cherries. The recipe for this specifies 6 cups of fruit, but I found that I actually needed a little extra fruit for the amount of juice that you're supposed to end up with and the ratio of juice to sugar that you're supposed to use. So yeah, you might need to increase the amount of fresh fruit that you start with. So you'll want to check all of those cherries, make sure that they're free of blemishes, because what you end up with is only going to be good as the fruit that you're starting out with. So you'll wash that fruit, stem it, and pit it. So you can use a cherry pitter like what Ellen discussed earlier, but I actually found for this recipe, it was easier for me to just take the pits out by hand. That's because for this, we're just crushing the cherries and mashing them up, so it doesn't really matter what they look like. But for recipes where you do want to preserve that whole fruit, like the pickled cherries, for example, it might be a good idea to actually pull out the pitter for that. Also, if you want to include some whole cherries in your syrup, then it would be good to use the pitter for that. You can save 1 to 2 cups to add in later. So you'll crush the remaining cherries in a saucepan, and then you'll heat the cherries to boiling and simmer until soft. It's better with cherries to start out maybe at a lower temperature once you're trying to get them to that boil instead of starting at the highest heat. So once your cherries are soft, after about 10 minutes, then you'll go through 2 steps of straining. So first you'll want to strain with a colander. This is where you'll put all of that crushed fruit and you'll collect the juice. I like to collect the juice in something like a big liquid measuring cup. So once you have that juice, you can toss out the rest of that crushed fruit, and we'll get into step 2 of our process where you'll want to use, this is a jelly bag. You can also use 2 layers of cheesecloth. So you will strain the juice that you've collected through here. You'll get a little bit of pulp in this bag that you can then kind of wring out. Just get all of those little bits so we have a nice clear juice that we're ending up with. So you should have about 4.5 to 5 cups of juice at this point. So you will combine your juice with 6 3/4 cups of sugar in a saucepan. This is when you can also add back in the whole fruit that you saved earlier. So you'll bring this to a boil, simmer for 1 minute, and then remove from heat. So you'll probably end up with some foam on top. So my favorite trick to remove the foam is to use a silicone food brush like this. You can kind of scoot the foam to the edge of your saucepan, and then it's easier to scoop out that way. So once you do that, you can ladle your syrup into your prepared jars. So you can use either pint or half pint jars. I'm going to make sure that these are clean. And if you are going to be doing the boiling water canning, these jars should also be warm at the point that you're adding in the syrup. So when you're adding your syrup, you want to measure your headspace, yeah, the specific amount of space that's between the top of the syrup and the top of your jar, it really matters what amount of headspace we have. So if we are doing the boiling water canning, yeah, if we have too much or too little headspace, then it will interfere with us getting that vacuum seal. That means that it's safe to store on the shelf. And if you are freezing your syrup, then if you don't have the proper amount of headspace, then as the liquid expands, then it can actually break through the jar. So if you are going to be doing the boiling water or steam canning, then you'll want to measure 1/2 inch from your syrup to the top of your jar. So the headspace tool has little markings with measurements that you can line up. So yeah, 1/2 inch of headspace if you're canning, and you want 1 inch of headspace if you're freezing. Also, if you're freezing the syrup, you want to make sure that you're using a wide mouth jar rather than a regular mouth jar. Yeah, these regular jars, they have what's called this shoulder. And if you're freezing liquid in here, then as it's expanding, then it can actually cause cracks where the shoulder is. So you want to have the wide mouth jar that's straight all the way up. And like Robin mentioned earlier, some of the jars do have a freezer fill line. This one has it. I don't know if you can really see it. It's a little hard, but yeah, right here, it has the freezer fill line specified. So we're getting that safe distance. So yeah, once you want to make sure also that before you're putting your lid on to put it into the freezer, put it into the canner, that you're wiping down your rim. This is, yeah, you heard how much sugar is going into this recipe. It's definitely very sticky. So we want to make sure that there's nothing that's interfering with the seal there. So you will then freeze or process your syrup. We do have instructions for processing in a boiling water canner that are linked at the slide that's at the end of our presentation. You can also access it with the recipe for the cherry syrup that we have. But again, yeah, you may want to avoid that heat treatment just to preserve that bright cherry syrup quality. So moving on to some ways that you can use your cherry syrup. These are all very simple, very delicious. So first we're going to do a quick cherry limeade. So for this, I have a glass with my cherry syrup in here, some ice, and some cherries and lime wedge to garnish. So to this, we're just going to add a squeeze of lime juice, and we're going to add a splash of some lime sparkling water. You can use whatever's your favorite, lemon lime or lime flavor. Yeah, mix that up. And then we have a great limeade. This is wonderful if, yeah, it's like a hot day, super refreshing, and really customizable to the amount of sweetness that you want. So you can really add the cherry syrup to your taste. Yeah, it's a great, simple little recipe. The next thing that we'll go through is a fruit salad. So I really like to add a little syrup onto my fruit salad just for an extra pop. Yeah, we don't need too much because we're not trying to make it overly sweet, but it does bring out the natural sweetness of the fruit. It adds a little tartness that's giving some complexity. It's nice, especially if you're like entertaining, hosting a brunch. It feels just a little more special and a little more elevated than just a simple bowl of cut fruit. And you can really use whatever combination of fruit that you like. So for me here, I have a mix of some cherries, some raspberries, some peach, and some mango. And so to this, I'll just add a little bit of my syrup. Yeah, a little goes a long way here. And really just stir it up. Yeah, turns out really delicious. I also added some mint in here for just another level of flavor, a little bit more complexity. Yeah, really beautiful, really delicious. And the last little recipe that we'll go through, now we're going to take a savory turn for this. So we're going to make a cherry vinaigrette. So here I have a mason jar prepared with a few tablespoons of the cherry syrup, and I'll just add a few things to this. First, we have some diced shallot, so we'll add that in there. We have our oil. It's good to use a neutral oil or a mix of neutral and olive oil. Using just olive oil can be a little overpowering. So, yeah, having a grapeseed oil with a little bit of olive oil works well. So, I'll add this here. And we do have all of the specific measurements for this in the recipe in the handout that you'll get after filling out the survey. So, yeah, specify that. So I have here some vinaigrette. It's nice to use a mix of light and dark vinegar for this. So I have just a little bit of balsamic vinegar as well as some rice vinegar. Yeah, so it's not all balsamic. That's kind of overpowering, but you can do really whatever mix of vinegars that you like according to your preference. And lastly, I have a few seasonings. I have some dried thyme, some salt, and some freshly ground pepper. So I'll add that all in. And now we can just add the lid onto our jar and shake this up. Then you have a great vinaigrette. It's perfect for a salad. And that would be a great place to toss in some dried, dehydrated cherries if you're making those as well. It's also nice if you make like a bowl with some rice or another grain and some roasted veggies. It brings some added flavor for that. It's also, yeah, really great as a sauce if you want to add it to a pork or a similar protein like that. Yeah, so that is a few ways to use our cherry syrup. And yeah, the possibilities really are endless. You can drizzle it on desserts or on breakfast items. You could make any number of cocktails or mocktails, and you can cook up a few other different kinds of savory sauces. Yeah, for pork especially is a really great pairing with cherry. All right, so I will turn it back to Robin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. That was really fun. Okay, I'm going to remember to share my presentation again and get us back to where we were. So the next person is Pickled Cherries with me. And today I'm going to present two different styles of pickles. A savory style that's tangy and herbaceous that's great for serving with meats, cheese boards, or grain or green salads. And a sweet style that's sweet but tart and spicy that is great for cocktails and mocktails and for the dessert course. This recipe uses fresh, not frozen cherries because you want them to retain their shape. These days, most fresh cherries available, as Ellen pointed out, are the sweet variety. Sour cherries are difficult to find at the grocery store or farmer's market in California, at least. So these recipes for pickled cherries, I'm going to be using sweet cherries. And you want to use your freshest cherries. You want to pick out any with mold or bruise spots, as they will make your pickles go bad quicker. You can leave the stems on and the pits in the cherries if that's your aesthetic choice. It's also the case, in my experience, that if you leave once you make the pickles, and if you leave the pit in, they retain a little bit more firmness. They're less squishy. My son doesn't like, when I had them, everybody tasted, he was like, oh, these are too squidgy. So he liked the ones with the pits in them. They also retain a little bit more of their cherryness. So it's not just an aesthetic choice. As I originally crafted this presentation, it's also somewhat, a sensory experience. So now you also may poke the cherries. If you do decide to leave the pit in the cherry, I suggest that you poke your cherries with a sharp fork or the tine of a toothpick in order to allow the cherries to absorb more of the pickling liquid. And but you can also just pick your cherries. It's up to you. If your cherries are the light variety, if they are the rainier type with the yellow with the blush, if you pit them, you may want to process them in ascorbic acid in order to retain that bright color. These are both quick pickles. What does that mean? The pickle from the barrel at the general store is a fermented pickle. Cucumbers or other fruit or veggies are placed in a salted brine that encourages the formation of bacteria that produce something called lactic acid. And that lactic acid creates an acidic environment that prevents the formation of yeast, molds, and toxic bacteria. Quick pickles are a shortcut. That acid environment is created by using a vinegar solution that makes the environment more preservation, that provides more preservation. You want to use for the best preservation, you want to use a 5% commercial white or apple cider vinegar. You don't want to use homemade vinegars because they may have a lower acidity, and you don't want to use vinegars that have added products that encourage the formation of pathogens. You want to mix with water in no more than a 1-to-1 ratio so that the water is less than 50% of the solution. You can add sugar, any kind, and salt. We're not relying on either the sugar or the salt for preserving purposes here. You do want to use pure salt, though. Any caking agents that may be put in the salt would make the solution look cloudy, and any additives can change the flavor profile. You will want to add some herbs and spices, and we'll discuss what exactly those are later. You're going to heat your solution up to boiling. You may also want to cook it a little bit, depending on the formulation, in order to blend and concentrate your spice flavors. So you'll wash your cherries, pit them or non-pit them. You'll put them in glass jars with a lid and then pour your boiling water solution over them. You'll want to then let your jars cool on the counter because you don't want to put them immediately into the fridge because they risk then heating up other things in the fridge and changing the temperature in your refrigerator. So you want to cool them on your counter, and then you want to wait 3 to 7 days for the flavor to penetrate before serving. So for savory pickled cherries, you have a wealth of different ideas, from thyme and rosemary, garlic, peppercorns, and mustard seeds, some bay and garlic and pepper, some thyme and a lemon peel, some chili pepper. Your general ratio is going to be 50-50 vinegar and water, and a little bit less sugar and maybe a little more salt. The recipe that's in the handout uses rosemary. And for sweet pickled cherries, more spicy as opposed to the herbaceous choices. Cinnamon, clove, star anise, orange peel, vanilla, cinnamon and orange, maybe star anise and vanilla, or some Szechuan peppercorns. In the handout, I've formulated or gathered together 2 different types of recipe profiles. One is more the cinnamon and the clove and maybe a little orange peel. And the other one is a little bit more Asian with some Szechuan peppercorns and some star anise. In the sweet pickled sweet cherries, you're going to do the 50-50 vinegar and water, and you'll see that the proportion of sugar is going to be higher. Now, in summation, these are refrigerated pickles. They cannot be canned. Nonetheless, if you use vinegar, use a 5% acidity because that's going to make your pickles last longer. You'll want to store them in the fridge, and your flavor is going to improve over time. So thank you. And I think we're ready. Do we have some more questions?
Yes, we do. Dawn asks, how long is it recommended to cool the quick pickled cherries on the counter before putting them in the refrigerator?
You want to get them pretty close to room temperature. You want to probably, if you want to speed things up a little bit, which you may want to do because leaving things on the counter and unsafe, at room temperature can increase the opportunity for spoilage. If you want to cool them down, you can put the jars in a pan of cool water, and that will speed the process up.
I have another question from Nancy. I made pickled cherries following a recipe I took from an MFP page last year. When processed and cooled, I found that my cherries were faded and wrinkled. Is this normal when pickling cherries? They were less than okay looking.
Now, did you pit them or non-pit them? Because I found that, and were they a lighter cherry? Did you use the rainier cherries, or did you use the Bing, the darker colored cherries? Because that can really impact on them. That's why they suggest processing the rainier cherries in an ascorbic acid solution. And I actually found that the non-pitted cherries just looked and tasted better. They have a little more cherry-ish retention, and their texture was a little bit better. So
Yeah. Nancy says that she can't remember if she pitted them or not, and they were dark red.
yeah, and it also can be, it also really depends. The best pickles are using the freshest cherries. Sometimes if you use older cherries, they're, going to age a little bit more quickly.
And I have several questions about the shelf life of the cherries in the fridge.
Um, you know, I think that they have a recommendation that's relatively short, something like 2 weeks. I find that my cherries, my pickled products do last a bit longer than that. It is, worthwhile making sure that when you remove any of the cherries, that you use a clean utensil, and that you make sure that there isn't any scum or mold or anything on the cherries. And if you see any of that, then of course you're going to want to throw those cherries away, not just scooping up the top of it, because frequently when any molds or yeast show up on the surface, they are coming from, much deeper within the product. Anybody else have any thoughts on pickled products in the fridge?
I agree with Robin. I find that the recommended shelf life is usually shorter than what my pickled stuff usually lasts in the fridge. But it'll also depend on things like your fridge temperature and like Robin said, if people are double dipping in the cherry jar.
So no putting your fingers in there and lifting them out, no matter how tasty they look.
Gotta get a fork.
Yeah.
Do we have anybody that wants to ask a question out loud? Well, if there are no more questions, then we can go ahead and wrap up.
I do have a quick question.
Great.
Yeah, for who was that did the syrup?
Rachel.
Rachel.
Is she gone? Oh, there she is. Hi, Rachel. Did you say plums? Could you use plums in that recipe?
Plums were not listed on
Have you
that
tried
list.
a plum syrup?
I haven't. Or
Okay.
I haven't tried a plum syrup for canning. There may be just, a separate recipe that's a different method than the berry syrup.
Okay, but any of the berries. You didn't mention boysenberry or mulberries. Could you use those?
Those were not on the list. No.
Okay. Okay, cool. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okie doke. And we have some upcoming events. For our upcoming events, you can use this QR code or the link and follow us on Eventbrite, and we use Eventbrite to publicize our events. So if you subscribe to our channel, then you can get all the upcoming events. We have 3 events in the next month. We have Ask a Master Food Preserver tomorrow night. So bring your questions about anything. It's a wonderful way to hang out with people who love preserving and talk about anything and all preserving. Next week on Tuesday night, we have freeze drying fundamentals from family meals to sweet treats. And then it was so interesting that our questioner brought up plums, because we have a class on stone fruit on Saturday, June 6th. And I will tell them that if somebody was interested in syrup, I don't know if they have all of their recipes in place to present yet. If you have a food preservation question, of course, as I said, attend our monthly, and that's the program we have every month on the second Wednesday each month. Come and hang out with us and discuss all things preservation, or submit a question to our helpline. And if you're interested in learning more, sign up for our monthly newsletter. And I wanted to do this one thing in the chat. I'm going to send a link in the chat to how to look for previous editions of our newsletter, because we have actually another cherry recipe that was in this month's newsletter that you won't be able to get if you subscribe to future editions. But if you follow that link, and it's a cherry chocolate jam. Oh my goodness, that sounds so delicious. And I wanted to make sure everybody would have access to that. So I've put in a link to allow you to search for our past editions of our newsletter so you can find that recipe. And please like us on Facebook. We're at UCMFP, or follow us on Instagram, and that's at UC Master Food Preserver Program. And you can follow these links or use the QR code. And we need your input. When you leave this Zoom, a brief survey is going to pop up in your browser, and wait for it. Sometimes it takes a second or two. Please complete this survey to help us improve. When you submit, and our inducement is the pop-up acknowledgement is going to include a link to the class handout, which has all the recipes that the participants tonight have discussed. And so I hope you didn't waste too much time taking notes, because all of the information is there in the handout. And thank you for your time and interest, and happy preserving.